100 years ago, China was in trouble. It was poor, weak, and slipping far behind the West. Many Chinese believed the country needed saving. One of them was a young man named Chen Duxiu. He would go on to become the founder and the very first leader of the Chinese Communist Party. Chen was born in the late 1800s in Anhui province. Like most kids of his generation, he was raised on the classic Confucian education. And like many of them, he found it boring and out of touch. At the time, many intellectuals began believing that those ancient Confucian traditions were holding the country back. What China really needed, they argued, was to embrace science, modernize education, develop industry, and most importantly, reform its politics. The young Chen Duxiu was electrified by these ideas, but the ruling Qing dynasty wasn't. It responded with harsh crackdowns, even executing some reformers. Disillusioned, Chen began speaking out, giving fiery public speeches and writing newspaper articles criticizing the government. His activism made him a wanted man, and eventually he had to flee to Japan. It turned out that Chen wasn't alone in his discontent. Not long after, a revolution swept across the nation, toppling the Qing dynasty and establishing the Republic of China. Chen returned home and even briefly served as a government official. But the new republic quickly descended into chaos, plagued by dictators and warlords who put their own interests above the nation's. Once again disillusioned, Chen joined an uprising against the new government. That got him into trouble again. And once again, he went to Japan. These repeated failures led Chen to a bold conclusion. Real reform wasn't just about changing government, it was about changing minds. He believed traditional Chinese culture had built a cage of loyalty and obedience. Questioning authority was discouraged, and that stifled curiosity, creativity, and individuality. The education system revolved around memorizing Confucian texts, which valued rote learning over scientific thinking. To Chen, that was the heart of the problem. How could China move forward if its people were still trapped in an outdated mindset? In 1915, Chen returned home and launched a groundbreaking journal called New Youth. He saw this publication as a way to educate and awaken the nation's future, its young people. In his very first essay, A Call to Youth, he urged them to be independent, not servile, progressive, not conservative, aggressive, not retiring, cosmopolitan, not isolationist, utilitarian, not formalistic, scientific, not imaginative. Chen's view struck a chord with many, and both he and his magazine quickly gained influence. His growing reputation soon earned him a post at Peking University, the nation's most prestigious institution. There, he was perfectly positioned to shape China's brightest young minds. And shape them he did. New Youth became wildly popular among students. Its message of change echoing the frustration with China's weakness and stagnation. For a time, Chen and his journal stood at the center of China's growing wave of intellectual awakening. But where there are progressives, there are conservatives. Some die-hard traditionalists fought the idea of change completely. To them, nothing was wrong with China at all. Its suffering came not from outdated ideas, they argued, but from the moral inferiority of foreign powers. On the flip side, some radical followers took the reform ideas to the extreme. In their eyes, everything about China was wrong. The only path forward, they believed, was to completely scrap entire Chinese culture, traditions, customs, and even the language, and fully adopt Western civilization. Unsurprisingly, these clashing views triggered a massive debate which became known as the New Culture Movement, a nationwide struggle to find a new path for China. If nothing unexpected happened, it might have stayed a purely culture movement. But as expected, the unexpected happened. In 1919, the First World War finally came to an end. Great news for a war-weary globe, especially for the victors. China, having sent 140,000 laborers to aid the Allies on the Western Front, was officially counted among the victors. After decades of humiliation, the country finally seemed ready to stand as an equal on the global stage. Many Chinese believed the upcoming Paris Peace Conference would allow them to reclaim Shandong, a province Germany had seized years earlier. Across the country, the mood was euphoric. Chen was swept up in this optimism too. In an article, he celebrated the moment as a triumph of right over might, believing that a new global order would finally protect weaker nations like China. Then Japan jumped in, waving a piece of paper and demanding that Shandong be handed over to them, not to China. They based their claim on the infamous 21 demands, which had already forced China to yield massive concessions. Those demands had sparked nationwide protest against both Japan and the traitorous officials who accepted them. If Japan's claim was recognized, another wave of mass protests was practically guaranteed. But in Paris, the great powers made their choice. Britain and France sided with Japan. US President Woodrow Wilson initially leaned towards China's position, but when Japan threatened to walk out of the brand new League of Nations, Wilson backed down. When news of the Paris Peace Conference reached China, the national mood of celebration snapped into deep disappointment and a burning sense of betrayal. No one felt it more sharply than the students. Thousands of them poured into the streets of Beijing, determined to appeal directly to the foreign embassies in hopes of reversing the decision. But their plan hit a wall, literally. The embassies were inside the legation quarter, an extraterritorial zone where Chinese citizens were not even allowed to freely enter. Blocked and furious, the students turned their anger toward targets they could reach, the traitorous officials within their own government. They marched to the home of Cao Rulin, the official responsible for negotiating with Japan. Inside, they found the man and beat him severely. Unfortunately, for accuracy's sake, it wasn't Cao Rulin. He had already escaped. Fortunately, though, the unlucky man was another traitorous official on their list. So it wasn't a total mistake. Amid the chaos, someone set the house on fire. Military police quickly arrived and arrested many students. Despite the chaos, the public stood firmly behind the students. To them, these young people weren't rioters. They were patriots, standing up for China's dignity. But the government saw things differently. They sent troops to crush the demonstrations and arrested more students. Meanwhile, the Japanese embassy demanded that China shut the movement down, calling it anti-Japanese. And to drive the message home, Japanese warships appeared off China's coast, a not-so-subtle reminder of who held the power. Both governments relied on sticks, not carrots, and surprisingly, it backfired. From Beijing, the protests spread like wildfire. Students in Shanghai, Tianjin, Wuhan, even in far-off provinces, took to the streets. Soon, workers went on strike, merchants closed their shops. The whole country was moving. The demands were simple. Don't sign the Treaty of Versailles. Punish the traitors who sold out the nation. Under overwhelming public pressure, the Chinese government finally gave in. Police withdrew from campuses. The arrested students were freed. The traitorous officials were forced to resign. And in the end, China did not sign the Treaty of Versailles. The protest came to be known as the May 4th movement, a turning point that would reshape modern China. As an activist, Chen was right in the middle of it. While most people focused their anger on a few traitorous officials, he urged them to think bigger, to see the real problem wasn't just corrupt individuals, but the system itself, the government. Of course, that kind of talk got him into trouble again, and he was arrested again. Eventually, the government had to release him. But still, Chen came out a changed man. He began to doubt his earlier faith in right over might, the idealistic belief that international justice would protect China. Reality had made one thing painfully clear. China's fate was not in its own hands. China's fate was decided by others. And as long as China remained weak, that would never change. China had to become strong, to stand on its own. But how? How could a nation so battered, divided, and humiliated rise again? This was arguably the most important question in modern China that haunted generation after generation. Many had paid with their lives when seeking an answer. They had tried so many paths, only to experience failure after failure. So, what about communism? For Chen and many other Chinese intellectuals, socialist ideas were nothing new. But Marxism? That had never really gained traction. After all, none of the world's great powers, America, Britain, France, had embraced it. Why should China gamble on an untested ideology? But the Russian October Revolution changed the equation. Suddenly, Marxism began to attract a small, intense circle of thinkers. One of them was Li Dazhao, Chen's close collaborator at New Youth. Li was a true believer in the working class, having even organized worker strikes during the May 4th movement. He was convinced that laborers had the strength to change the nation. Following the movement, Chen and Li published a series of articles praising Lenin and the Bolsheviks, while fiercely condemning imperialism and capitalism. Unsurprisingly, these views yet again put Chen at odds with the authorities. Under growing political pressure, he slipped out of Beijing and fled to Shanghai, where the central government's control was much weaker. Luckily for him, Shanghai turned out to be the perfect place. As China's most industrialized city, it had a large and rapidly growing working class, exactly the kind of audience Marx had in mind. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was paying close attention to China's political awakening. In a calculated gesture of friendship, Lenin declared that all unequal treaties with China would be annulled. To be fair, the Soviets never fully lived up to this promise. But compared to the treatment China received at the Paris Peace Conference, it felt like a rare moment of respect. With Soviet support, Chen and Li helped organize Marxist study groups across the country. And before long, they began to talk about a larger, bolder idea: forming a political party, a communist one, in China. But before that, let's shift our gaze from the leading intellectuals to the young. They were, after all, the future of China, exactly the audience Chen hoped to inspire. Take these two friends, for example. One hot summer night, they sat together debating China's future. Both had once been drawn to anarchism, but now their paths were beginning to diverge. The first young man argued that China was simply too vast, too complicated. At this rate, he said, it would take 1,000 years for China to truly change. And if 1,000 years it needs, 1,000 years it would take. His friend disagreed. He was a devoted reader of New Youth and had been a student leader during the May 4th protest. He pushed back. China can't wait 1,000 years. Its people can't wait 1,000 years, and it won't take 1,000 years. If we do our best, in 50 years, no, maybe in just 30, communism will transform China. They debated and debated, until it was clear neither would convince the other. After that night, the first young man left for France. He eventually joined the Nationalist Party of China, but was later accused of embezzlement. In the end, he spent his final years in Uruguay, far away from home. As for his friend, he continued his journey to Shanghai, where he took part in the founding of the Communist Party of China. 28 years later, he would lead that party to establish the People's Republic of China. His name was Mao Zedong.